So the first bill I'll present in the Equity and Justice package before you today is Senate Bill 180, known as the RISE Act. The RISE Act is a bill that repeals certain sections of the code that mandates additional years of punishment for prior nonviolent drug convictions. Under current law, Senate enhancements can be applied retroactively. 3 years for every prior conviction for possession for sale, or similar drug offenses to any person currently convicted for a similar offense. The original intent of the 3-year sentence enhancement for prior drug convictions was twofold. First was to deter the sale of drugs, and second, to reduce the availability of controlled substances. As we now know, the war on drugs strategy has failed at decreasing drug availability. Controlled substances continue to be cheaper, stronger, and typically more widely available today. What we also know is that sentence enhancements have resulted in overcrowded jails and prisons, unjustly harsh sentences for nonviolent crimes, and have crippled both the state budget through the Department of Corrections as well as local budgets. According to the administration, there are currently over 400 sentence enhancements currently in state statute. This bill addresses just one of those enhancements, the additional 3 years for each prior nonviolent drug offense. The research is clear. Longer prison stays alone are not a deterrent and have no effect on the number of drug sellers or the ability of drugs. We also know that these enhancements have not been evenly applied. In fact, the rates of drug use and sales are comparable across racial lines, yet people of color are far more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and incarcerated for drug law violations than their white drug-abusing counterparts. The RISE Act will begin undoing the damage of the failed, biased war on drugs, which was a set of policies rooted in fear. I have with me today on SB 180, the RISE Act, 2 witnesses, Sarah Johnson. Sandra, I'm sorry, Sandra. And you know what? It says Sandra right there in front of me, and I said Sarah. Sandra Johnson, Policy Fellow with the Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and Nick Stewart Oaten, Deputy Public Defender from the County of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sandra, and I'm a Policy Fellow for Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. I am also a proud member of All of Us or None. I am also a formerly incarcerated woman. I was directly impacted by these 3-year enhancements for prior convictions. In 1997, my son was murdered, and that led me to a very dark time in my life. I started to use drugs because of the very painful situation, and I didn't want to deal with the horrible loss of my child. The enhancements I received for prior conviction caused me to spend many more years in prison than necessary, which stopped me from getting the help that I wish was available to really help me with my drug addiction that I was suffering from. And that could have been drug treatment, grief counseling, and therapy. There was times that I was pressured into taking a deal from the courts that included enhancements. I am sure the 3-year enhancements may sound good and make the public think that it is safe, they make the public feel safer, but I can assure you they don't work. They don't stop people from committing crimes. They don't stop people from selling or using drugs. The prison system has been proven to be very expensive and take away money from state and local budget. Money that can be spent on resources that can really help people in the community that are impacted by the system. SB 180 would free up tax dollars that could be better spent on effective community programs that I mentioned earlier to you all. Drug programs, counseling is what helped me. And it is shameful that I had to do so much prison and jail time first because of these long sentencing laws. California needs to recognize the results of locking up people of color and note that enhancements are applied in a racial biased way. SB 180 will be a step towards helping to heal the damage that our communities are suffering because of unfair sentencing law. I urge you to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Nick Stordoten speaking on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association. I can't bring to the table the same personal story that Sandra has, but I can bring to the table over a decade practicing law in this area. And I want to make sure the committee is aware of sort of the underlying use of this law and how it actually affects the practice of law down on the street. The first thing is this law was designed to target large drug dealers, people who are repeated drug dealers. It has not actually worked out that way. Because there's no weight limitation within the statute itself, somebody who sells half of their own personal ounce of crack to their friend in order to buy more crack is treated the exact same as the guy who sells 80 kilos of coke to the guy down across the border. We still have weight enhancements in this state, which would still affect large-scale drug dealers, even were this 3-year prior reduced. For example, the 80-kilo example I just gave, you get an extra 25 years. This particular enhancement is actually used to target small drug addicts who sell on the side, almost primarily. And let me give you a very common scenario that we see in my home county of Los Angeles all the time, particularly in the Skid Row area. Undercover police officers will walk down the street and they will ask passers-by if they know any place to buy drugs. The local drug addicts will agree to help in exchange for a piece of whatever the undercover officer is buying. It's called, "Can I have a chip?" What'll happen is that the undercover officer will take that drug addict to buy dope from the local dealer, and then will arrest both the dealer and the local drug addict for sales. And if that local drug addict has ever done this before, that's a 3-year prior. To give the committee a sense of how unjust this is, if somebody assaults somebody in a manner likely to cause great bodily injury twice, their maximum possible sentence in California is 4 years. If you sell a gun to somebody, an illegal firearm to somebody in California, your maximum possible sentence is 3 years. If you do it again, it's 3 years. If you chip off a rock of coke in this state twice, even if it was 20 years apart, your maximum sentence is 8 years with a minimum of 3. This is a statute that is long past due for revision. It does nothing to encourage people to go into treatment. And the final point I want to make is for all of you who have counties who are struggling with budget, which I assume is all of you at some point, the latest assessment from the CDC is that every year of incarceration costs around $75,000. So when we're talking about a 3-year period of incarceration for nonviolent drug sales, especially on this level, we're talking about almost $250,000 per use of this statute. There is no member here, I would respectfully submit, who can't think of a better use for that money than putting a nonviolent drug user like Sandra in prison again and again and again without treatment. We'd really urge your yes vote on this, at least for consideration by the full assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses in support? Name and organization.
George Gascon, District Attorney, San Francisco, in support.
Thank you.
Glenn Backus for Drug Policy Alliance and the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights in support.
Thank you.
Lizzie Beacon with the ACLU of California, sponsor and support.
Thank you.
Adrienne Shilton with the Steinberg Institute in strong support.
Thank you.
Jim Lindberg on behalf of the Friends Committee on Legislation of California, co-sponsor, urge an aye vote.
Leah Burnley on behalf of Californians for Safety and Justice in strong support.
Joseph Johnson and LSPC, all of us are none in support.
Natalia Marquez from Legal Services for Prisoners with Children in support.
Thank you.
Pamela Lowe from Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, support.
Thank you.
Juliette Blackman with Legal Services for Prisoners with Children in support.
Thank you.
Rosa Akil on behalf of the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color in strong support.
Thank you.
Maddie Hyatt for California Civil Liberties in strong support.
Thank you.
Diana Campos on behalf of the California Catholic Conference in support.
Thank you.
Maureen Washburn with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice in strong support.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California, Chapter in support.
Vanessa De Leon with the Youth Justice Coalition in strong support.
Pepita Carvalho with the Youth Justice Coalition, strongly support.
Thank you.
Gloria Gonzalez with the Youth Justice Coalition, strongly in support.
Melissa Immel on behalf of Mayor Edwin Lee and the City and County of San Francisco in support.
Nicole Orniz with the Hernandez Strategy Group on behalf of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice in support. Thank you.
Marcus McKinney, Legal Services for Prisoners for Children, proud co-sponsor and strong support.
Thank you.
Fatima Khan from the American Friends Service Committee, strongly support.
Wesley Edwards with the League of Women Voters of California, strong support.
Patricia Song with the Children's Defense Fund, California, in strong support.
Thank you.
Kim McGill with the Youth Justice Coalition in strong support.
Robert Harris on behalf of SAIU California and the California Society of Addiction Medicine in support.
Thank you.
Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, also in support.
Thank you.
Samantha Corbin on behalf of Common Sense Kids Action, also in support.
Mad with Courage in Oakland in strong support.
Thank you.
Joshua Courage in Oakland and strongly support.
Thank you.
Maritza Pantoja from Courage, and I strongly support.
Thank you.
Christopher Sanchez with Trilla, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, proud to be a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Marty Veronica on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association. Regret to inform you that we are opposed to this measure in its current form. We've had discussions with the author's staff on suggested changes to the measure, which we feel would meet some of the author's concerns with respect to the one-size-fits-all approach. Specifically, the court could be given the discretion to strike the enhancement, or in the interest of justice, or the court could be given the discretion to impose a 1, 2, or 3-year enhancement based on the circumstances of that particular case. Another alternative that we have suggested to the author's office is targeted again at the repeat drug seller. After 2 prior convictions, the court in sentencing would then impose the 3-year enhancement. Again, I think that these approaches differentiate the casual dope seller and user from one who makes his business selling drugs. As it is, we remain opposed to this approach taken by the measure, which would treat that serial dope dealer the same as a first-time offender. And we would like to see that individual taken out of the community, because who suffers but the addict who he sells to? Most dope dealers don't taste their own product. They push it on to the community, and it's the community that suffers as a result. For these reasons, we are opposed. I would also indicate that on behalf of the chiefs of police, standing in for Mr. Feldman, they are also opposed to this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Laura Tanney from the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, Bonnie DeManis as the District Attorney. We are also opposed to this measure as currently drafted. This country and this state is in the middle of an opioid crisis. And that comes partially at the hands of the street-level dealers who are participating in killing young individuals as well as older individuals through repeated crimes of dealing these drugs at the street level. This is not the time to be reducing the penalties for these individuals. Just 2 weeks ago, 36,000 pounds of drugs were interdicted by the U.S. Coast Guard off the coast of San Diego. They were on their way to San Diego, and that border is an area in which massive amounts of drugs are smuggled into this state and this country. This state receives a very high percentage of those drugs, and this obviously perpetuates the problem, but the street-level dealers are also perpetuating this problem by continuing their lucrative endeavors and selling these drugs over and over again, and they need to suffer the consequences of having additional penalties, which I can remind the committee is right now subject to the discretion of the court, and the court only need impose that enhancement if, in fact, the crime warrants it. So for those reasons, the San Diego County District Attorney's Office is opposed.
Thank you. Are there any other witnesses in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Usha Machlar on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? Any questions from committee members? Mr. Lackey.
Yeah. Well, certainly, there's no argument from me that there is some sympathy that is deserved for people who are addicted to drugs who are selling on the side to support a very, very troubling condition. However, that does not represent the majority of people who are peddling drugs. Certainly it is a concern that we should address, but this remedy is a broad brush that is very, very hurtful in my mind. And to say that selling drugs is nonviolent is indirectly inaccurate. This, I have to tell you, it's a very violent world. It's a very, very violent industry. And there's a lot of senseless murders that are associated to selling, with selling drugs. And so I think it's unfortunate that we have this scourge, and this rise in opioid use is alarming. I can tell you that there's just so much tragedy, and this is not a racial issue. This is not a socioeconomic issue. This goes across the entire fabric of this country, much less our state. And I think that these kinds of approaches miss the mark of really how we get sensible correction to the root of this problem. And it's unfortunate that I am compassionate on this issue, and I also understand the nature of how we need to find real remedies, but unfortunately I do not think that this addresses that, so I won't be able to support it.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Lackey, and I think that we'll have to agree to disagree on some of the points you raised. I agree that drug use and abuse is not a racial issue, but sir, I would have to disagree with your assertion that the way in which drug treatment, incarceration, stops and arrests is not racially motivated. There are too many studies, sir, that suggest increased law enforcement presence in underrepresented communities of color and poor communities. And so when we look at the racial and ethnic demographics in juvenile halls, county jails, and prisons across this country, compared to drug use and sales in terms of the ethnic disparities, one simply could not argue that the way in which we deal with those who are stopped, caught, and arrested is indeed, sir, racially and class bias. Please don't assume that I would suggest that drug sales is not a violent act. But what strikes me in hearing your questions and comments and those of the opposition is a complete denial of one of the witnesses here in terms of someone who was a user of drugs. And so when we talk about eliminating the automatic 3-year enhancement for prior nonviolent drug offenses, we've completely denied her reality as a drug and substance user. These can be cases, sir, where people are stopped and arrested for possession. And so the constant references to the drug peddler, I agree, but we are denying the reality of a significant number of people who receive these enhancements. And those are people who have drugs on their person.
When I look at this particular bill, there's no address for mere possession. these are more serious
Oh, I
offenses,
agree.
every one of these. And
I
so
agree.
would
It's
disagree with that assessment.
possession for personal use or perhaps sale. And the reason that's included, sir, is because research also shows that it's up to the discretion of the arresting authority in terms of determining if the amount meets the level of intent to sell. We had a young man testify on this bill last year who was charged with possession with intent to transport. And he was on a skateboard when he was arrested. He was a young man of color. And so communities of color across the state, and data reinforces that depending upon who the arresting authority is and the race and class of the person being arrested often dictates the nature of the charge rendered.
And I don't deny that there are some misuses of judgment, but to use that as a categorical reference to all law enforcement is also unfair.
Okay, let's agree to disagree.
Okay, so.
And you can close.
I would love to close, thank you. I just want to be very clear about this. This bill eliminates the automatic 3-year enhancement for prior nonviolent drug offenses. I think the DA from San Diego suggested that there was judicial discretion with regard to this enhancement. It is not. It's automatic. And I want to be clear about what this bill does not touch. There are, as I stated, over 400 enhancements on the books. What this bill does not impact, if you sell near a school, prior prison term, you can get 1 year. If you have in your possession more than 1 kilo, you can get 3, 5, 10, up to 15 years. If you use a gun, if you use an assault weapon in the relation with this current crime, if it's gang related, prior prison term, prior strike, you can get your sentence doubled. Possession for sale, 2, 3 to 4 years. Possession for sale of PCP. Possession with intent to manufacture PCP. Sales, 3, 4 to 5 years. Transportation across multiple counties. Manufacturing, selling the transportation of meth. Those are all enhancements that can be rendered on the current crime. What this bill is simply saying is, if I committed a crime in the past, served my time in the past, I should not automatically, for a nonviolent drug offense, have 3+ years added to my sentence when all of these other enhancements are currently on the books and the judge can use their discretion to currently augment my sentence for the current crime at hand. We are simply saying that we don't feel that that's fair or appropriate. With regard to the amendments the District Attorney's Office suggested, they were received in my office Monday, June 26 at 2:38 p.m. And so we'll be more than happy to take a look at this language to see if it's something in consultation with my sponsors, if it's something that we can continue to evaluate and determine if we think it's appropriate for this bill. We know that the current policy fails to prevent drug use, fails to prevent drug sales, and fails to rehabilitate while wasting taxpayer dollars. We cannot address the mass incarceration of all people without reforming sentences for petty drug sales and drug use. It's a necessary step, and now is the right time to take it. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. And, I've probably said 1,000,000 times at this committee, since I've gotten involved with public safety, I've probably visited more prisons than I've ever wanted to visit. Most of them are lodged with people of color, African American, Latino. And when you dig down deeper, many of them, probably the majority of them, were charged with the crimes you're mentioning, nonviolent types of crimes or users. And they are receiving mandatory minimums, which keeps our prisons even more crowded. And so I appreciate not only what you're doing and narrowing it and focusing it on individuals that should be given a second chance, but more important, the fact that you're excluding probably the individuals that my colleague here as vice chair is probably talking about more of. So they aren't part of that group that you might consider dangerous to society. So I appreciate you making that clarification. and also making the clarification that you did receive amendments. Unfortunately, you received them at the 11th hour, and you can't just quickly make a decision on them. And so the chair is recommending an aye vote, but more important, knowing that you will look at the amendments, we'll give them a serious consideration, but most important, that this is not an open call for us to allow dangerous individuals to get off scot-free. This is about the real cause of what the problems we're having right now with our drug policies. So, Madam Chair, call the roll.
The motion is due pass. SB 180, Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, aye. Lackey. No. Lackey, no. Flora. No. Flora, no. Gonzalez Fletcher. Gonzalez Fletcher, aye. Rubio. Rubio, aye. Santiago. Santiago, aye.
That measure passes. Thank you.